many of you taking the time to join us for today's webinar from Real Story Group. We've got our all-star team here of Tony Byrne and Scott Simmons. My name is Scott Dill. I'm on the business development team here at RSG, and we're excited to walk you through how to modernize your MarTech selection process. Going to be a fast-paced, fast-moving 30 minutes together, but as always, we will have some time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask, feedback you'd like to share, perhaps some anecdotes about your selection processes, feel free to share those in the questions tab and go to webinar control panel, and we'll get to those at the end of today's session. For our subscribers on the line, as always, this will be available in your subscriber library, so keep an eye out for that within the next few days. And for everyone who's attending today, you will also be able to get a copy of these slides from Tony and Scott. So stay tuned for that. There are several new people online with us, and I just wanted to welcome you, and also, of course, welcome our subscribers who are here with us today as well. If you're new to Real Story Group, we've actually been at this now for 24 years, and we've always taken the same approach when it comes to the relationship that we have with the vendors we evaluate, in that we really don't have. Our goal is to sit on your side of the table to make sure that you're making educated choices around these vendors and giving you advice on what they do well, but maybe more importantly, what they don't do well, where they could fall short for you. So we don't work for these vendors in any way. We don't speak at their conferences or write white papers for them. Again, our goal is to be an advocate for you as you're making these important technology choices for your enterprises. This is a look at our coverage areas, and with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tony and Scott, who will walk you through this and the remainder of today's session. Guys?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Scott. Good to see everyone today. As if you know, Real Story Group, we cover a lot of different marketing technologies, start out with web content management, and have kind of continued from there. About 20 years ago, we started creating these subway maps, or tube maps for those of you in London, showing all the different marketplaces and which vendors do what. And of course, some vendors in the center of the city have a lot of different capabilities, but how do you actually compare those capabilities against others? We have definitely a hard-hitting, tough evaluation methodology. So you can see here, for example, on the orange line, there's nearly 30 different plausible customer data platforms. Our research over the years helps you understand which ones are the right fit for you. And that's really our whole mantra here, is around fit, and not what's objectively the best vendor, but what's the right fit for you. And so our whole evaluation methodology is centered on that. And then over the years, we started helping our subscribers and clients actually select these technologies. And we realized that traditional waterfall approaches really weren't working well. So we put together a more agile approach. You can find it detailed in this book, The Right Way to Select Technology, which I'll talk about in a little bit further. But we're going to kind of give you a really kind of a more modernized approach to this challenge, because many of you have been in various cycles of modernization of your MarTech operation, your digital operation, your MarTech and digital stacks, but you haven't necessarily modernized the way that you bring new technology into the organization, and that needs to move with the times too. So we're going to talk about selecting the right technology, about modernizing your stack, thinking, incorporating modern trends. We're going to talk a little bit about some pre-modern approaches you should avoid, and then my colleague Scott Simmons is going to tell you about a more modern approach. So without further ado, let's get into it. Those of you who follow us know that we like to work with reference models for and the enterprise. A reference model is kind of a generic view of the world, but it's also kind of a generic argument about where the world is going. And we typically customize these for our subscribers. In other words, we sit down and talk to you about your environment and change the names and move some of the boxes around so that you have essentially a logical blueprint of what your stack looks like. This is, again, a kind of generic blueprint, but we're making an argument here that there are these foundation layers that live underneath your engagement and interaction delivery environments. And this is having a profound effect on enterprise stacks. What it means, fortunately, is that you can actually get lighter at the engagement services tier. So we're working with a number of subscribers where they're getting lighter with respect to their e-commerce, their web content management, certainly their outbound marketing, loyalty, even customer care, where they're transitioning to lighter services there and moving a lot of the complexity lower in their stack in more channel neutral capabilities, what we call customer foundation services. At the same time, they're realizing the marketing importance of these customer foundation services, and very often marketing, working with either data teams and IT teams, are driving the modernization of those as well. So it's changing the whole landscape. And of course, you've always had the challenge of making sure you're kind of swimming in the right lake here, selecting, make sure that if you have a web content management challenge, that you're selecting a web content management tool and not something else. But now there's kind of an additional interesting modern layer to it, which is certain capabilities are going to matter more in your stack going forward, and you ought to right size accordingly. So we describe this architecture as loosely coupled and strongly backed, and this is the only way to get to speed and scale, definitely the only way to get to omni-channel, which we all want to do, and it's really the only effective way to do AI, is to have these customer or enterprise foundation services. Definitely, we're seeing among smart, forward-looking enterprises a lot of complexity, people resources, and budget moving there. And so as you select tools, you may want to then think about sort of being a little bit more robust and enterprise-wide in these services here, and then going lighter and being more agile here. And so this is really about kind of understanding your requirements in the broader architectural context and where stacks are going. So first, you want to modernize your stack thinking, but then also incorporate some what we would describe as kind of modern trends. And of course, as you might guess, we're going to talk a little bit about AI here too. So one trend, just wrote about this on LinkedIn yesterday, really critical for you to understand. There's always been this debate between suite versus best of breed. And we know in the MarTech and digital space that this debate has been answered. Stack composability has won the debate, flat out. This is a collection of some of the logos that are used by 25 of the largest enterprises in the world. These are enterprises that within the last 5 years have been participating in Real Story Group's exclusive MarTech Stack Leadership Council. So we surveyed them and said, what are you using for all these different capabilities? We actually couldn't fit all the logos on the slide, and at a certain point, we know since then we could add even more. But the point is here that particularly among large enterprises, their stacks are predominantly best of breed, or they have composed them from different solutions over time. We also know that statistically, or with respect to survey evidence, that enterprises that have composed their stacks have yielded better results as well. So from a selection standpoint, what this means is that you shouldn't default to an existing vendor in your stack. The winning strategy is to get the right solution for the right set of services that you're asking or that your business is asking you for. So of course you have Salesforce and Adobe, to a lesser extent Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, sometimes Optimizely, and Acquia saying, we can just turn it all over to us. We can do everything for you. This is a message that they're giving Wall Street. It may be a successful message on Wall Street. It's not a successful message from your stack. This is a way to get locked in. This is a totally 2010s view of the world. This is definitely not a 2020s, let alone a 2030s view of the world. We consider it toxic or even radioactive to take this approach. So there's another, of course, dimension to modernizing your selection strategy, and that is, what is your orientation towards AI? And this is really important because vendors, when they are approaching customers these days, or enterprises like yours, that's pretty much all they want to talk about is AI. They're being compelled to do this by their leadership, and behind them, their investors, right? We have to have an AI story. Our AI has to be predominant in our story. Let me show you all these cute, cool AI features. This, we would argue, is for most of you not necessarily in your best interest. In other words, to light up the AI features that happen to come in your diverse engagement platforms. that the smart enterprises are really treating AI as a layer. They're distinguishing between insights AI and decisioning AI and generative AI. They're understanding that there are use cases within those. They're prioritizing those use cases, and then potentially layering agentic AI on top of that. So all of your vendors are also coming out and saying, we have agents. What those agents are doing primarily, because they're bound to a vendor, is what we would call workflow automation. The real value here, though, is going to come from stack orchestration, or orchestrating workflows and data and events across different vendor platforms. And this is something that likely we're going to have to do ourselves. It's likely not going to come from specific vendors. So our argument is that for most of you, it's not that AI is unimportant to MarTech. It is important, but that you're going to, for a variety of different reasons, including these blue boxes on the right that talk about responsible AI, for a variety of different reasons, you're going to want to inject AI as a layer rather than take whatever all your 30 different stack vendors happen to throw in as AI features. So AI is really more of a layer than a feature. And in fact, we would argue you could apply this same selection methodology that Scott's going to talk about to your AI vendors. So we've got vendor evaluations of AI vendors. We're just about to release an extension to that where we're evaluating agent AI vendors. So you can apply these same selection methodologies to that rather than accepting it as sort of a feature. And again, these foundational platforms are really important to your success with AI. If you haven't invested significantly there, your AI is unlikely to really be a differentiator for you. So that's kind of modernizing your MarTech thinking in this new world of the 2025, 2026. So the last thing I want to do is try to warn you away from some legacy sort of pre-modern approaches to selecting technology. Then we'll get into the good stuff, the fun stuff, which is what's a modern approach. So we see enterprises typically falling into these 6 traditional approaches. One is love at first sight. Oh, I went and saw this vendor, it does this really cool stuff. We gotta get it. And of course, you know, love at first sight doesn't always lead to good long-term relationship. The second model we see, particularly within certain verticals like insurance, higher ed, and government, is sort of the my cousin Vinny approach, which is, oh, this vendor worked really well for my cousin Vinny, so it's going to work really well for me. The third approach that we often see is the horse race approach, and that is some analyst firm like Forrester or vendor IDC says, you know, so-and-so is ahead, pick them. But we know that that often leads to more grief than not. The point isn't not the winning horse, but what's the right fit for you. The fourth one is, oh, I've got this old pair of dungarees sitting around my closet, let's just use them. So I've got some legacy vendor, and we consider Salesforce and Adobe as legacy vendors in this space. We already have them, let's just use them, which also leads to a lot of grief. The fifth approach we sometimes see is it's somebody else's problem. So I'm going to have the data team or the IT team or the marketing team do this in isolation, and really you need all 3 pillars of those. Now the sixth way of approaching this is maybe the most pernicious, because it feels logical and scientific, and that is like happiness is a set of warm binders. I'm just going to get all of these different Excel spreadsheets. I'm gonna create all of my requirements. I'm gonna separate the must-have from the must-have and from the need-to-have to the nice-to-have, and I'm gonna put weighting behind it and all of that, and it's gonna seem very scientific, and I'm mathematically gonna figure out which is the best vendor, and those approaches almost never work. First of all, people end up backing into the math based on the vendor that they liked, but secondly, they get away from what should really be a human environment. With flesh and blood humans who are both your customers and your employees, what's right for them. So my colleague Scott's going to show you a more human-oriented approach to this. But what often happens is these approaches, these 6 approaches, become so tedious and so abstract that a lot of times, you know, you end up, you know, just asking other people, hey, you know, what should I use, you know? And of course, your consultants will tell you they have their favorite, particularly your implementation partners have their favorite. So there is trail wisdom. Trail wisdom is okay. We even did as a joke, what if we took all these web content management vendors and made them out to be Game of Thrones characters? This was just more for fun than anything else. Of course, software vendors have strong personality, but what we really often find is that it ends up coming down to this. It's like I'm so sick of the whole process that I'm just gonna make a choice on a wing and a prayer. And then I rationalize it by saying, oh, well, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what vendor I get anyway. I've got bigger fish to fry. And you do have bigger fish to fry around organizational change management and budgeting and everything else that are clearly important, but you want to start with the right bidding vendor, and you don't want to just rely on guesswork. You want a methodical, human-oriented process towards getting to the right fit. And so my colleague Scott Simmons is going to tell you just what that approach is all about.
Thanks, Tony. All right, so would you add slides for me? I don't remember that one. All right, so let's look at a modern evidence-driven approach that reduces risk and speeds time to value. I'm going to show you how we move from opinions and vendor theater to hands-on proof to find the best fit. So this approach borrows from design thinking, business-focused, team-based, empirical, iterative, and adaptive. We start with outcomes, not a feature wish list, right? So no more big binders or Excel spreadsheets. We include all the necessary teams, so marketing, CX, data, IT, security, legal, finance, and any other team that we might feel is needed for the selection. We test claims with your data and your people. We learn in short cycles, narrowing the vendor list as we go. We expect requirements to evolve as we discover what really matters. All right. So design thinking, we can go back to that previous slide for a second. Mm-hmm. So, you know, David Kelly kind of from Stanford originated this idea of design thinking and a human-centered approach that aligns to people's needs. So technological possibilities and business viability. So in our selection context, that translates into 5 steps. So now you can jump to the next slide. So emphasize. We interview your operators, right? The actual people who use the systems or will be using the system, and your stakeholders, capturing needs, pains, edge cases, and governance considerations. And then we build scenarios or use cases that bring those to life. So at this point, we also have a very long list of vendors, right? We're kind of at the top of the funnel. We then kind of move into a define phase, right? Where these scenarios become the basis for our RFD or a request for demo, right? We kind of move away from calling it a request for proposal because we're really going to push the vendor to demonstrate the product in a very particular way using our scenarios. This also helps us narrow these scenarios in this RFD, help us narrow kind of our vendor lists down to a manageable set that we will send this RFD out to. And we instruct the vendors to prepare their demos in line with those scenarios, so we have a clean kind of apples to apples comparison. We then move into an ideate phase where we review the proposals and then facilitate the demo sessions, keeping the vendors on track and making sure they hit the key scenario items. We will then facilitate kind of a down select meeting that'll narrow the list to 2. You can jump to the next slide. Mm-hmm. So most standard RFP processes would basically have, in that point, taken it down to probably a single vendor. But we feel it's critical to kind of take it a step further. So we move into then what we refer to as a prototype phase, right? Where we work with you to structure a bake-off between the 2 finalists. The vendors will come on site and provide access to an environment that's loaded with the necessary data. And then your team, your operators, will execute those refined set of scenarios for a hands-on keyboard comparison, right? We'll also do breakout meetings to dive into other topics like pricing, integrations, security, or initial implementation and rollout, just so that we have a clear understanding of what we're getting ourselves into. This will typically get us to a finalist, but in some cases, there's a little bit of uncertainty. So we might run a short POC with the end finalist in kind of a test phase to answer those kind of last hard questions. This process works, right? It drives teams' consensus fast. I've been doing vendor selections for more than 20 years. I've only been with RSG for almost a year now. And the selections that I've done in this process have been the most successful I've ever seen. So that being said, let's land on the 10 field tested practices that keep everyone aligned. So these 10 takeaways consistently improve decision quality and time to value. So number one, get clear about your stack and exploit tectonic changes. So recenter on a modern architecture. Tony showed it earlier. Content and data and decisioning as a foundation, pluggable engagement, and AI as a layer, not a monolith. Align selection to where your stack is going, not to where it's been. Get clear about your business case. It's not about a list of requirements. It's about what you need to actually accomplish, with the tool. Build a cross-department team. Include marketing, customer experience, data, IT, security, legal, finance, and operations. Shared decisions, shared accountability. Never default to the incumbent. The incumbent must run the same scripts as the challengers. Incumbency is a data point, not a decision rule. Evidence wins, not familiarity. Center your RFX on people-oriented use cases. Replace feature checklists with user story scripts. Vendors must demonstrate your scenarios. That's how we expose usability and operational effort. Don't fixate on embedded AI services. Evaluate AI where it touches your scenarios for quality, explainability, governance, and cost to operate, not just because it's packaged inside the suite. Number 7, adopt to an adaptive iterative model. Lock the learning loop. Emphasize, define, ideate, prototype, test. This has been shown to work in a variety of different scenarios, and it definitely works in this vendor selection process. Never skip a bake-off. The 2-vendor bake-off is your risk reduction engine. It reveals any smoke and mirrors that may have been in the demo and real operator experience and how it will be able to work with the vendor. Negotiate early and often. Surface commercials during evaluation. Pricing tiers, usage metrics, exit terms, SLAs. So we discover deal breakers. So we don't discover deal breakers after we're emotionally selected a winner. And number 10, get expert guidance when needed, right? Independent advisors like RSG can help craft stories, run bake-offs, and benchmark results. That accelerates decision quality and keeps vendor theater out of the room. So bottom line, modern selection replaces vendor theater with hands-on evidence. If we follow these steps, especially the bake-off, we'll choose technology that fits our people, our data, and our outcomes, and we'll know why. So let's open it up to any questions.
Yeah, we'll just remind you, you can ask any questions or challenge any of the assertions we're making in the questions tab of the GoToWebinar. And I see one already on business case. But one of the things, that you're probably asking yourself, what does RSG bring to the table here? First, you can simply get access to any of our hard-hitting vendor evaluation research and our tools that can help you build a short list and figure out just, how you should be challenging that vendor. Some of our clients do what's called a full stack subscription. They essentially license all of our research here, and we help them with their stack strategy as well. And then another subset of those have joined our exclusive Real Story Group MarTech Stack Leadership Council. So if you're interested in that council, feel free to reach out to my colleague, Scott Dill. So Scott, you can just talk about next steps, and we'll just take a look at questions here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Great presentation. So as Tony mentioned, you can always explore our research, download samples from any or all of the areas that we cover. Simply just go to the coordinates that you see here on the screen. Tony mentioned the Stack Leadership Council, and that'll be meeting again in mid-November around AI and agents. So if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, please let me know. We've got a great group that meets quarterly about that. And I do see some questions that have come in. Tony?
Great. So the first question is, how much of my business case do I share in the RFD? Scott, any thinking on that?
Sorry, one more time, Tony.
How much of my business case should I share in my RFP?
It's a really good question. I would say most of it, but don't give away the secrets, right? I think the real value is in how you're going to use the tool. So the scenarios are kind of what are really going to ground or guide the vendors forward. But having a bit of background on why you're doing what you're doing can be helpful to the vendors.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that we do is put what our business objectives are. So those objectives are coming out of a business case, and we always list our business objectives in an RFP. So the vendors are very clear, because if you don't list those, they're going to ask anyway, because vendors tend to be very distrustful of RFPs or RFDs or RF whatever. And so we found always listing your kind of business objectives, which you also use as your selection criteria, really gives us a kind of connects the dots for the vendors and gives them some transparency. So Stefan is asking, your agenda title slide reads selecting the right CDP technology, but this is valid for more than just CDP, isn't it? Yes, Stefan, you caught us in a little bit of a copy paste error there. So thanks for pointing that out. We will correct this. This is really about MarTech in general. But one of the interesting things that we learned was that CDP, we thought would really, selecting a CDP, because it's so complicated, it can be very technical. There are issues around speeds and feeds and other things that we wondered, is this human-oriented approach we're talking about really the right approach for something like a CDP, or for that matter, something like AI? And we discovered it is, that at the end of the day, there's still, you have your human customers that you're trying to empower or support in some way, and then you have the humans that are actually managing these platforms, using these platforms, leveraging these platforms, or they're working on platforms that integrate with what you're going to select. So at the end of the day, we still really emphasize a human-oriented process. So the last question from Paula is, how do I include open source vendors in this process? And so, I don't know, I'll take a stab at it, Scott, and then you can add something on top. Usually you'll find you're still going to need some sort of, if it's commercial open source, like Acquia Drupal, then there's going to be a commercial firm you can go to. If it's more community open source, then you're still probably going to need some help implementing it. So bring in an implementation partner and have them be the advocate for that solution. They'll probably give you a very good story and demo around how that works. I don't know, Scott, anything else that you would add to that?
Even if you have an internal team that is pushing it, have them go through the same scenarios and demo the same way the commercial vendor would.
Yeah, so good. So now we've got one other question here. When a big player, Oracle, Salesforce, Adobe, is the main platform in a tech stack, what is the best way to introduce agentic GAI for stack orchestration? Should this be built in-house, or should we try to get it from a vendor? So if we're talking specifically about agentic, we're going to have a lot to say about this in early October when we release our research, but I can share, Stefan, a little bit of our thinking on this now, which is that if you really want to do true orchestration, you're not going to get that from your MarTech vendor. This is going to be in the near term more of a build rather than buy thing. And that the agents that are being pushed by Oracle, Salesforce, and Adobe are really about piecing things together within their platforms, or maybe across a couple of their tools, but they're unlikely to bring unlock the highest value here, which is more kind of orchestration across heterogeneous platforms, which is where the really big efficiency and speed wins are. And so we tend to think that the winning solution here is going to be some combination of build and buy, because even some of the platforms that you can buy and deploy are going to be kind of low code-ish. So we'll have a lot more to say during our council meeting on this, and we're going to show some examples of this. But really great question. All right, appreciate everyone's time and energy here. You can find out what's coming next from our own website. In the meantime, always great to spend half an hour with you For Scott Simmons and Scott Dill, this is Tony Byrne signing out for now. So long.